Welcome back. For our second lead, we take a look at the controversy surrounding the owner of the NBA team, the Los Angeles Clippers. Last month, a controversial recording of Donald Sterling was made public that shocked basketball fans around the world. In the recording, said to be of Sterling and a female friend, he asks her not to take pictures with black men, just one of the many racial comments he apparently made about African Americans. And despite receiving a lifetime ban from the NBA, there are growing indications that Sterling will fight to retain ownership of the Clippers. Well, joining me now, Charles Ellison, a Washington correspondent with the African American newspaper, the Philadelphia Tribune, and a political consultant. Charles, thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's focus on this particular issue just for a moment. Donald Sterling, he's banned from the sport of basketball.
Right.
He was fined a maximum penalty of $2.5 million, and the league's going to try to force him to sell the team. If we could call it a crime, does the punishment fit the crime?
You know, a lot of people were actually very surprised and, you know, sort of giving a lot of pats on the back to Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, for basically this type of sort of unprecedented action. It seemed rather dramatic. It seemed very theatrical to do like this $2.5 million fine and lifetime ban from the NBA, also trying to sell the Clippers as well. But, you know, when you look at some of the more structural issues that are sort of underneath this, the sort of the antics, if you will, you know, sort of the racially charged antics of Donald Sterling, and the reaction, the public outcry, you see that there are some much more deeper issues that the NBA, the National Basketball Association, has not addressed. In fact, these issues have been going on for some time. In fact, Donald Sterling has been this type of very volatile, racially charged figure who's been spouting, you know, sort of off the cuff, all these sort of racist sort of innuendo and also all sorts of rhetoric for many years now. In fact, also he's been the center of a lot of housing discrimination lawsuits that have been perpetuated by the Department of Justice. A lot of people saying that he's somewhat of a slumlord because of the property that he owns, and he not being, you know, that particularly amenable to people of color who are in his who are living in his properties, who are tenants in his properties. And so a lot of people have been saying this has been going on for a long time. Where was the NBA back then? And now suddenly you get this, you basically get this moment where it gets caught on audio. It's this audio faux pas, which essentially makes the social media circuits, and now you have the outrage, and now people are paying attention. But, you know, really the issues that have not been addressed are the issues of ownership. 98% of NBA basketball teams, of professional basketball teams, are owned by white men. Maybe there are only other two owners of color. That's Michael Jordan, you know, the former basketball legend. Right. And you can argue that, you know, Michael Jordan is really not a full owner of the Charlotte Bobcats, and also you have another owner as well in Sacramento.
Okay, but if we look at the response in the United States, especially in the media here, to what Donald Sterling had said, you know, one would think, wow, we've suddenly discovered there's a racist among us.
Right.
You know, because, you know, it seems to me like it was the outrage of the day. Well, it was the outrage in the 24-hour news cycle at that time, and we had everybody expressing their indignation at what they heard from Donald Sterling, whereas in the United States we know from research that's been done, from the media, etc., that there is a far more insidious type of discrimination that takes place here that is almost institutionalized. If we look at the figures just, say, for the prison population in the United States, you know, the United States has the biggest prison population in the world. 40% of those people are black people. If you look at how the judicial system operates, you mentioned housing, if you look at the education system as well. So there's a lot more to be angry about here.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the conversation that's being missed. Race and racism in the United States is still very prevalent. But it's a very uncomfortable topic. A lot of Americans, 40 years, particularly after Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, you know, some 50 years after Brown versus Board of Ed, the landmark desegregation case, people are still having some trouble facing some very stark realities about race in America. And so there are two discussions that take place here when you have these types of incidents with Donald Sterling and his comments. One is you have a conversation on rhetorical racism, which is really just discussion on the topic of race, or people sort of expressing their attitudes about race in America, or expressing their attitudes about people of color, people who are different from them. But the other more serious conversation, the more substantive conversation, is about institutionalized racism, about structural racism, not just in terms of the disproportionate amount of black men, say, that are in prison, but also as far as the disproportionate impact of predatory lending practices on people of color, on African Americans and Latinos, or the fact that even though the U.S. unemployment rate has been going down some, we've actually seen it go down dramatically from about, it was like 8% this time last year to now going down to like 6.3%. Still, the African American unemployment rate is still very high. It's double the national average officially, but unofficially, when you look at the underemployment rates, you see a black unemployment or underemployment rate of about 25–30%. In fact, since the recession in the United States has been happening since 2008, we've seen the evaporation of about a quarter of the black middle class. So those are the issues that tend to get glossed over, don't get paid attention to when we have these moments of outrage over comments by public racists like Donald Sterling.
Right, and when we look at the ambivalence that you talk about on the part of the country and how to deal with racism, I just want to look at one fact here, and it is related to the Donald Sterling case, but it is perhaps an illustration of what you're talking about. A national poll which was conducted by CNN finds that 47% of the public supports a forced sell of the team, while 50% are against it. Doesn't that tell us that there's no, people are very confused about this? Right. I mean, we're in a place at a time when they shouldn't be.
Exactly. There's still a lot of mass confusion out there about, the topic of race, and there's still a very significant portion or block of the American public which feels like race really isn't an issue. We've come along, which we have. We've made a significant amount of progress here in the United States since, say, the 1950s, the 1960s, since the time of Jim Crow.
There is a black president.
Right. Well, and folks would like to sort of celebrate this post-racial America, but the fact of the matter is that we're still not aggressively taking on or directly addressing some really deep-rooted cultural, social, economic, and political issues and problems. As we talk about NBA ownership, the ownership of the Clippers, is going to be, very fascinating to kind of watch this process unfold, and whether or not the NBA commissioner, whether or not the league itself will facilitate the sale of the Los Angeles Clippers to an owner of color. Now, obviously, that goes into, there obviously are more rich white guys that are, who have the kind of money to buy a professional basketball team. But it goes back to, once again, that conversation about structural racism and the fact that we've had these underlying economic issues which have prevented people of color from essentially realizing or recognizing their full economic, political, and social potential.
Charles, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
And that is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. Once again, that's theheat@cctv-america.com. I'm Anand Naidoo in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.